Power Rangers franchise has been handing teenagers the keys to giant mechanical dinosaurs for over 30 years, and somehow nobody's explained how these things actually work. Today I'm breaking down every Zord system in the franchise, what powers them, how they think, and why some are genuinely terrifying. Starting with the ones that started it all, Dinozords. Here's the thing about the original Dinozords that nobody appreciates anymore. These were created by Zordon and Alpha 5 millions of years ago during the war against Rita Repulsa, ancient alien tech from an intergalactic conflict, and 5 teenagers in 1993 just hopped in and started piloting them like go-karts. No training manual, no orientation, just vibes. 5 Zords, Tyrannosaurus, Mastodon, Triceratops, saber-toothed tiger, and pterodactyl, all powered by the Morphin grid and tied directly to each Ranger's power coin. The coins weren't just cosmetic, they were the literal ignition key to a 50-story mechanical dinosaur. Lose the coin, lose the Zord. Rita knew this, which is exactly why she spent half of season 1 trying to steal or destroy them, and they only lasted 1 season before Lord Zed showed up and destroyed them. Ancient technology from a millions-year-old war, and some guy with a metal face and 0 skin melted them like action figures on a radiator, which is, you know, not ideal. But if you think losing your ancient dinosaur robots to a skinless warlord is rough, wait until you see what Zordon replaced them with. Thunder Zords. The Dinozords were barely cold before Zordon decided to throw the entire playbook out and start fresh. The Thunder Zords weren't just new paint on old metal. They were the first full system upgrade in Power Rangers history, and they were kind of insane. Here's the thing, the Dinozords got wrecked by Lord Zed so badly that Zordon and Alpha had to channel the power of Thunder to create entirely new Zords from the old ones. That's not a tune-up, that's pulling your car into a shop and driving out in a fighter jet. But what makes the Thunder Zords genuinely fascinating is something nobody really talks about. They were literally rebuilt from the Dinozords themselves. The Tyrannosaurus became the Red Dragon, the Mastodon became the Lion, the Triceratops became the Unicorn. Same core, completely different beast. The Red Dragon could even shift between Dragon mode and Warrior mode on its own, just out there switching forms mid-battle like it had a personal stylist. And the Thunder Megazord, completely different assembly, instead of 5 Zords combining the same way every time. The Red Dragon stood as the core, while the other 4 essentially became armor and limbs around it. The whole philosophy changed from 5 equal parts to 1 centerpiece wearing the others like accessories, which is, you know, not ideal for team morale when you're the guy who turned into a leg. But if the Thunder Zords were the first step towards smarter, meaner machines, the Ninja Zords took that philosophy and made it disappear. Ninja Zords. Here's where Power Rangers stopped being a one-trick pony. Every Zord system before this had the same basic game plan. Things get bad, Rangers combine, big robot punches, monster. The Ninja Zords threw that entire playbook out the window. Season 3 introduced 6 Zords instead of the usual 5. The Ape, Bear, Frog, Crane, Wolf, and Falcon Zord. And for the first time in franchise history, Rangers could actually fight in their individual Zords without immediately slamming them together into a Megazord. That sounds like a small change. It wasn't. It was the single biggest tactical shift the show had ever made. But the upgrades didn't stop at flexibility. The Ninja Zords were built around actual ninja philosophy, meaning speed and stealth over raw power. These things moved faster and hit more precisely than anything the Rangers had piloted before. Giant mechanical animals darting around the battlefield like they had somewhere better to be, which is, you know, not ideal if you're the monster trying to land a hit. Each unit also had distinct combat abilities and could hold its own solo. The Frog could launch its tongue as a weapon, the Crane could strike from above, and the Ape threw punches that would make the original Megazord jealous. And when the team finally did combine, the Ninja Megazord was noticeably sleeker and more agile than the Thunder Zords ever were. This was the template. Every Zord system that came after owes its fight solo or combined flexibility to the Ninja Zords. But if you think modular ninja robots were the peak of mid-90s innovation, the Zeo Zords are about to prove you dead wrong. Zeo Zords. Everything before this point ran on some flavor of biological energy. Dinosaur spirits, thunder pulses, ninja animal essences, all organic, all intuitive, all fundamentally alive. The Zeo Zords threw that entire philosophy in the trash and replaced it with crystals. Specifically, the Zeo Crystal, an ancient artifact split into 5 subcrystals that generated a power source completely unrelated to anything the Rangers had used before. This wasn't an upgrade, this was a full system reboot. The Zeo Zords ran on crystalline energy that actually grew stronger over time. Every previous Zord had a fixed power ceiling. The Zeo Zords had no ceiling at all. Their energy was constantly increasing, which is basically giving your Megazord Zord a battery that never dies and only gets better. That scaling power made a real difference. The Zords were faster, hit harder, and responded more precisely than anything before them. For the first time, the Zords weren't drawing from spiritual energy with all its unpredictability. They were running on raw, ever-growing crystal power. But here's the trade-off nobody mentions. The Zeo crystal could be disrupted. The Machine Empire targeted it multiple times, and any interference meant the Zords lost functionality entirely. Previous Zord teams pulled from Morphin energy that was harder to isolate and cut off. The Zeo Zords had one power source, and if you messed with it, everything went down. Which is, you know, not ideal when you're defending the planet against an empire of machines designed to do exactly that. But if the Zeo Zords cracked the door open on non-biological power sources, the next generation kicked it completely off the hinges and drove a car through it. Turbo Zords. Every Zord system before this operated on the same basic principle. Giant robot sits in a hidden bay somewhere, waiting to be called. The Turbo Zords threw that entire philosophy in the trash. These things disguise themselves as cars. Street legal, functional, drive them to the grocery store cars. Which means for the first time in Ranger history, Zords weren't hiding in volcanoes or underground hangars. They were parked in driveways. And that's not a gimmick. That's a fundamental shift in how Rangers operated during peacetime. Previous teams had to maintain secret facilities, manage power consumption on idle Zords, and basically pray nobody stumbled into a cave and found a 40-story mechanical dinosaur. The Turbo Zords eliminated all of that. Your neighbor's sedan could be a war machine, and you'd never know, which is, you know, not ideal for the neighbor. Here's where it gets genuinely impressive though. The entire design philosophy prioritized getting from zero to combat ready as fast as mechanically possible. You could go from sitting in traffic to piloting a Megazord component before anyone even processed what was happening. The power source came from turbo technology rather than the magical or crystal-based systems of previous seasons, marking a hard shift toward mechanical engineering over mysticism, less reliance on a command center that historically had a habit of exploding at the worst possible moment. But the real legacy is multi-configuration doctrine. Turbo didn't just give you one Megazord, it gave you the Turbo Megazord and the Rescue Megazord, establishing the expectation that every future team would need multiple formation options as standard. That became the blueprint going forward. But if you think Cars with Attitude were a big leap, wait until the Rangers left Earth entirely. Space Mega V, this is the moment everything changed. Before 1998, every single Zord in the franchise was fundamentally an Earth toy. Big, powerful, impressive, sure, but locked to one planet like the rest of us. The Space Mega V system looked at that limitation and said, nah, we're good. Here's the thing, these Zords could travel through deep space, not orbit, not float around the moon for a bit. Actual interstellar travel between planetary systems. That's less a vehicle and more a civilization level leap, and the Rangers just casually had 5 of them parked in the Astro Megaship. The engineering required to sustain human life across those distances alone makes every machine on Earth look like a calculator you'd find in a cereal box. But the real shift wasn't speed, it was scope. The Mega V system operated in wildly different planetary environments, from the vacuum of space to alien worlds with completely different atmospheres. Each Zord was built to handle conditions that would melt, crush, or suffocate literally anything else humans have ever built. The Rangers went from local neighborhood watch to interstellar defense force overnight, and they didn't even need a fixed base on Earth to do it. The Astro Megaship served as a mobile command center, meaning the team could operate independently across the galaxy with zero ground infrastructure. No stationary command center required. Each Mega V had its own unique combat specialization on top of space travel capability, from Mega V1's flight superiority to Mega V3's rocket power, which is, you know, a slight upgrade from the Turbo Megazord breaking down on a highway. But if you think crossing galaxies is where Zord technology peaked in terms of sheer weirdness, wait until you meet the Zords that aren't machines at all. Galactabeasts. Every Zord system up to this point operated on the same basic principle. Human builds machine, human pilots machine, machine punches monster. The Galactabeasts threw that entire philosophy in the trash. These weren't machines at all. They were living, breathing alien creatures from a distant planet. For the first time in Power Rangers history, the Zords weren't based on Earth biology, not dinosaurs, not jungle animals, not cars pretending to be animals. These were genuine alien fauna from a world humans had never set foot on. But here's where it gets interesting. The Galactabeasts had a natural bond with their Rangers, built on trust and loyalty rather than mechanical control. Rangers weren't sitting in a cockpit barking commands at an unfeeling machine. They were piloting creatures that actively chose to fight alongside them. The Zord responded because it wanted to respond. You're not operating equipment anymore. You're partnering with something that has its own will and could theoretically just walk away. And the combat capability backed this up. The Galactabeasts could fight independently without their rangers, something no purely mechanical Zord had ever done. That's your Zord having its own survival instincts and battle intelligence, which is, you know, not ideal if you're a monster assuming the big animal is helpless without a pilot. The bond meant these Zords could later transform into Galactazords, armored forms combining the creature's raw power with actual pilotable systems. Every Galactabeast brought its own instinct to the fight on top of whatever its ranger commanded. The franchise had officially moved from pilot your robot to earn your partner's respect. But if you think sentient alien Zords were the peak of that philosophy, the Wild Zords took the concept and cranked it to a level nobody expected. Wild Zords, every Zord up to this point followed orders. The Wild Zords had opinions. Here's the thing about Wild Force's Zords that separates them from literally everything before and after. These weren't machines with animal paint jobs. They were animals with machine parts, organic tissue directly interfacing with mechanical systems, not running alongside them, fused with them, and that fusion created something nobody expected: personality. The Wild Zords routinely acted on their own instincts during battle, sometimes cooperating with the Rangers and sometimes just doing whatever they felt like. They chose their Rangers. They could refuse to fight. They communicated through roars and emotional bonds, not control panels. They weren't glitching, they were thinking. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Wild Zords originated from Animarium, a floating sky island that housed them for roughly 3,000 years after the defeat of the Orgs. 3 millennia of just vibing on a turtle-shaped chunk of land in the sky, waiting for the right humans to show up. They're not ancient by geological standards, but by human civilization standards. These things are older than most empires that ever existed. The Rangers weren't piloting weapons, they were earning the trust of something that had been around since before the Roman Empire was a thing. And when that trust was strong, genuinely strong synchronization between Ranger and Zord, they could combine into increasingly powerful Megazord formations using animal crystals. The sheer number of Wild Zord combinations in the show was wild. Over 100 different Zords appeared across the series. That's not a roster, that's a zoo with opinions. The Wild Zords proved Zords could be partners instead of tools, which is a beautiful concept right up until you need your partner to stop freelancing and follow the plan. But if sentient animal robots sound complicated, wait until you see what happens when Zords go full law enforcement Delta runners. Here's where the whole philosophy changes. Every Zord we've talked about so far operates on the same basic principle. Threat shows up, Rangers summon Zords, Zords punch threat. Delta runners threw that entire playbook out the window. These things were built for speed, designed as pursuit vehicles for SPD. The Delta runners weren't your standard giant robots waiting to stomp on a monster. They were high-speed law enforcement machines, each one specialized for a different terrain type, covering ground, air, water, and everything in between. Think less ancient mystical weapon and more futuristic police cruiser, except it weighs several thousand tons and can level a city block. But the real shift? Delta runners were the first Zords designed around the idea that Rangers were cops on patrol, not warriors waiting for a crisis. The pilots weren't summoning these things from a volcano or a mystical pocket dimension. They were already in them, rolling through the city on duty, which is, you know, a fundamentally different relationship between Ranger and machine. Their combination into the Delta Squad Megazord was one of the fastest assembly sequences we'd seen at that point. No elaborate transformation ritual, no dramatic sky merge, just lock, click, done. Now, fair warning, the deeper lore on Delta runners is thin, real thin. There's no unified technical manual, no neat canonical breakdown. Most of what we know comes from the show itself, and a whole lot of community interpretation filling in the gaps. But the concept itself is what matters. Zords stopped being emergency weapons and started becoming persistent urban infrastructure, always patrolling, always on the clock. And if you think that blurring the line between weapon and public utility is strange, wait until you see what happens when they went back to dinosaurs for the second time. Dino Charge Zords. Everyone thought this was a nostalgia play. Dinosaurs again, for the third time. Surely this was just Bandai reaching into the vault because they ran out of ideas. And honestly, looking at the lineup, you'd be forgiven for thinking that. T-Rex, Triceratops, Stegosaurus, we've seen this movie before, twice. But here's the thing, these weren't your 1993 dinosaurs wearing a fresh coat of paint. Not even close. Underneath that familiar dinosaur skin was the most modular Zord system the franchise had produced in years. The core gimmick was the Dino Chargers, small battery-like devices that powered every single Zord individually. That's not a cosmetic change. That's a fundamental redesign of how the entire mecha system operates, and the architecture was completely different from anything that came before. Previous Dinosaur Zords, both the originals and the Dino Thunder lineup from 2004, ran on centralized power sources tied to their respective Ranger teams. Dino Charge said no, individual chargers, modular, swappable, which meant the base Dino Charge Megazord could incorporate additional Zords as arm or leg swaps without redesigning the entire combination from scratch. The result? A massive roster of combination variants. Dino Charge had 12 total Zords across the season, and they could mix and match into numerous Megazord configurations: Stegoptera, Pachyrex, Pararaptor. The list kept going. Each swap changed the Megazord's weapons and fighting style, giving the team more tactical options than almost any previous Ranger generation had access to. They looked like a love letter to 1993. They operated like a build-your-own mecha toolkit with nearly limitless configurations, which is, you know, exactly how you trick an entire fanbase into accepting a radically new system without a single complaint. But if Dino Charge was the franchise pretending to look backward, the next generation stopped pretending entirely. Cosmic Fury Zords. Every Zord system we've talked about so far has one thing in common. They react. Something attacks, the Rangers respond, the Zords hit back. Cosmic Fury threw that entire philosophy in the trash. These Zords don't wait for you to throw a punch. They already know you're going to throw it. The Fury Core technology running inside these things processes data at 8,192-bit multidimensional capacity. To put that in perspective, the Zeo Zords were running on roughly 256-bit crystalline processors. Dino Charge bumped that up to 2,048. Cosmic Fury quadrupled it again, and then added the word multidimensional to the spec sheet, which is never a casual addition. But the raw processing power isn't even the interesting part. These Zords have an adaptive neural matrix, which is a fancy way of saying they learn. Every fight makes them smarter. Data miners and supplementary materials confirm the system hits optimal efficiency after roughly 3 to 4 combat encounters. So by the 4th monster of the week, your Zord has basically written a dissertation on how to kill it faster. Here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. Cosmic Fury Zords achieved 92% consciousness parity with their Ranger's mental state. That's not piloting. That's basically wearing a 200-foot tall version of yourself. The Zord doesn't just follow commands. It thinks like you think, reacts like you'd react, and occasionally knows what you want before you want it. The result? 14 distinct Megazord formations with a 2.8-second transformation window and predictive engagement modeling that simulates combat outcomes 4 to 6 seconds before the threat even manifests. 6 seconds doesn't sound like much until you realize most monster fights are decided in less than that. Combat went from chess to seeing the future, which is, you know, not ideal if you're the villain, but if you think predictive modeling is the ceiling for Zord technology, the Prime Zords are about to make Cosmic Fury look like a calculator. Prime Zords. So where do you go after Zords that can learn, predict the future, and process data across multiple dimensions simultaneously? Apparently you stop being a person and become the robot, which is, you know, not ideal. Prime Zords represent the theoretical endpoint of every system the franchise has been building toward. These things don't communicate through conventional means. Not radio signals, not data uplinks, not even the morphing grid relay system that every previous generation depended on. They operate on quantum entanglement principles, instantaneous coordination across multiple simultaneous dimensional planes with zero signal lag. The Dinozords needed the Rangers to physically call them and form up in a single dimension. Prime Zords maintain combat formations across several realities at once. The leap in capability is staggering. Advanced quantum level architecture with predictive modeling that outstrips anything we've seen from previous Zord generations. They're not reacting to what an enemy is doing. They're reacting to what an enemy is going to do in a timeline that might not even happen. Multiple Megazord configurations, cross-dimensional formations that literally could not exist before this system. Transformation sequences compressed to near instantaneous. But here's where it stops being a spec sheet and starts being a philosophy question. Rangers don't pilot Prime Zords. There's no cockpit moment, no I'm in the robot now transition. The Ranger's consciousness and the Zord's quantum matrix operate as a single unified entity. You're not driving a machine, you are the machine. Your thoughts exist simultaneously in your body and across a mechanical form spanning multiple dimensions. The franchise spent 30 years slowly closing the gap between pilot and vehicle. Dinozords needed voice commands. Galactobeasts used empathic links. Later generations pushed toward deeper neural synchronization. Prime Zords finished the job. Full integration. The robot is the Ranger. The Ranger is the robot, and nobody can agree on whether that's the ultimate evolution of everything Zordon started building in 1993, or whether it's the moment where the person inside stops existing as a person at all. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.